Good morning. Welcome to our live stream session for today. Last in, first down accounting, or LIFO. It's about how you keep the books. Sorry, that's next month. Welcome to Six-Figure Projects. We'll do that instead. I want to welcome you from around the world being here. Make sure you click on your chat icon, which will enable you to ask me questions. Good morning, Praveen from Chicago. Good to see you here. When I was first out on my own, one of my early clients, as a lot of you know, was Merck Pharmaceuticals. I wound up working for them, with them for 12 years. Over $2 million in direct business, probably another $2 or $3 million in indirect business and referrals, because during that 12 years, Merck was named by Fortune magazine as one of America's most admired company 5 years in a row. They were on the list for the 12 years, but they were number one for 5 years in a row, unprecedented, breaking IBM's record. But early in that relationship, I was introduced to them by someone from my former company. They had asked for something which my former company couldn't do. It was a training firm. And so I went down to meet with some people. And they told me what they wanted. And I went back home and I created a proposal for $14,000. Now, this is 1985, $14,000. And I went back down. And I slid this proposal, no options, one fee, $14,000, across the buyer's desk. And I started to see flashing lights in front of me, and I was perspiring profusely. And I said to myself, I am not cut out for solo practice. This is not working because I'm having a heart attack. But what happened was I had stopped breathing. And when you stop breathing, you're deprived of oxygen. And what I thought was an hour later, but was really about 40 seconds later, the buyer slid it back at me and said, "This is good, when do we start?" And I immediately said, "Oh my God, this should have been $35,000. And today, of course, I would have said it should have been $175,000. Now I'm going to take you a few years beyond that, but 2 years later. And my wife and I had finally settled in. I was making enough money to pay the bills. We still didn't have too much in the bank. Our lifestyle had raised kids in private school and so forth and so on. And it was one of those times in anyone's practice where things were dry. But I had a proposal in front of Merck once again, different buyer. And option 3, I had learned something. This is just before $1 Million Consulting was written. Option 3 was $68,000. I was right here in this house. Didn't look anything like it does today, but here I was. And we needed this money badly. And if we could get this contract closed, if they went for option 3, it would take us through the rest of the year. $68,000 would do it. So my wife kissed me goodbye. I got in my car, drove to the airport here. I drove back there, no limos. But I got on the plane to Newark and landed there about 30 minutes later, got in my rental car and drove down to Rahway, where Merck was, this industrialized area. Now they're in Whitehorse Station or something out in suburban New Jersey. But Rahway, New Jersey. And I walked into the buyer's office, and he was there with his subordinate, his key subordinate. And I'll never forget, his name was Del McPherson. And Del had a funny habit. He would travel the world and sneak into opera houses and sing on the stage when no one was looking until they threw him out. So he's one of the few guys in the world who could claim, he's sung in La Scala and so forth and so on. In maybe 40 countries he traveled for Merck, probably more than Pavarotti, right? Anyway, Del was a hard guy, tough guy. And he looks at my proposal. And he says to me within 30 seconds, "We like this, Alan. We'll take option 3, $68,000. He said, "When can we begin?" I said, "Well, I'm here. I can begin now." I said, "I'll give you an invoice." And he said, Fine. Go interview who you want to interview." I said, "Well, before that, Del, could I make a phone call and check on messages?" Of course, I wanted to call my wife. He said, "Of course, take any cubicle." So the cubicles, as you can imagine, are about this high. And you can see people easily. And these are the old phones you pick up and talk in like this. So there's no privacy. So I walk into an unused cubicle and I call home. My wife picks up and says hello. And I said, "Yes, this is Alan. Any messages?" And she said, "How does it go? How did it go?" And I said, "Well, it went fine." And she said, "Well, how much? I said, "The year we graduated." And she says, "Grammar school, high school, college?" And I said, college. And she said, $68,000. I said, "Thank you, no messages, I'll call you later, So that $68,000 was pretty good. And you know something? You get 10 of those, not even one a month, and you got $750,000 just about. Add in some passive income, you have a good year. My colleague, Colleen Francis, she of the owner of a Rolls card in my hierarchy, has pointed out that there's nothing wrong with $70,000 projects today. You get enough of them, you're in very good shape, and she's right. However, I'm here to talk to you today about six-figure projects. And I'm here to talk to you about six-figure projects because a $100,000 project is more profitable than five $20,000 projects. There's less labor intensity. There's less management. There's more economy of scale, and there are many few people to deal with. So consequently, even though I am not arguing about 5 or 15 or 50, 50 or 60 or $70,000 contracts, I am telling you that six-figure projects are more profitable and they give you a lot more discretionary time. So having established that, let's talk about what that means. The sweat equity in a $10,000 sale and a $100,000 sale are the same. By sweat equity, I mean the following. You have to work just as hard for either. You have to find a buyer, you have to establish a relationship, you have to close the deal, you have to start delivering. So the sweat equity is the same. So why not go for a higher amount? The labor intensity is less, the moving parts are fewer, and so it's much more profitable. If you're able to go to Growth Access, my Growth Access program, and watch two things: Six Figures to Seven, which is a program that I delivered 2 or 3 times, but it's on there in its entirety, and In the Buyer's Office, which is the most popular thing I've ever done for repurchase. If you're not in Growth Access, it's $2,500 and it's yours for life. You can get it on my site, about $75,000 worth of materials, but these are 2 things, 6 to 7 and In the Buyer's Office, I urge that you see. For those of you who are graduates of my Shameless Promotion program, therein you saw an example. Now, there are 5 key elements of six-figure projects. Critical element number 1, adeptness at value creation. You have to create the value that will justify someone giving you what? 6 figures. 5 elements, 6 figures. See, we spare no expense on visual aids. So here is a formula, which is in many of my books, but which I want to accentuate, which is this: tangible results times annualization. That means monetization of results times the number of years they'll be there and growing. If you improve a sales force, they stay improved and improve more, for example. Plus intangible results times emotional impact. Behind every corporate objective, there's a private buyer's objective. So what's the emotional impact? What's the emotional impact of spending more time with your family? Of working a 40-hour week instead of a 60-hour week? If you're in small business, if you're dealing with someone who owns a small business, instead of worrying whether to invest in the business or take an extra vacation or pay for your kids' college education or invest in cosmetic surgery, you can do it all. In a corporate business, you can regain more of your life. If you're a corporate officer, a senior manager, regain more of your life. Get more prestige. Be more eligible for promotion. That's what I mean by emotional impact. And then, plus peripheral benefits. So if you have a project, and the objective of the project is to decrease attrition and retain talent, quite positive, an intangible benefit would be that I spend less time interviewing people. And that's great because I hate interviewing people. A peripheral benefit, though, is we might become known as an excellent place to work, a strong place to work in terms of employee satisfaction, and that would reduce our recruiting costs. We wouldn't have to go to so many headhunters. People would be coming here. Our employees would be referring people to us. Consequently, these are the sum total of benefits in these 3 dimensions, and if we divide those by our fee, we get the value or the return on investment. And so bear in mind that we have to create this value. Now my formula, and you might have heard this in some prior live stream events or my prior workshops, is that for every objective you have for a project, you should have 3 value statements. So if you have 4 objectives, you should have what? 12 value statements. And half of that total should be monetized. And that way, you will create the return on investment that gets dramatic. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I told the Growth Cycle group here this, sitting in these seats here a week ago, and I'm going to tell you, and it's heresy. It's different from what I usually say, but I'm telling you for being here on my live stream broadcast, and that is, don't ask the buyer for value and wait for it. Suggest the value to the buyer. Suggest the value to the buyer. Tell the buyer, don't you think if you did this, you'd become a company of choice and spend less on recruiting costs? What are your recruiting costs this year? What if we reduce them by 20%? That's how you introduce value. Don't you think that if you did this, you would get more input from employees about what the customers could use, especially from your service people who are at the customer sites, and that would reduce your R&D costs by directing them to more pragmatic needs that the customers are willing to pay for now. What are you investing in R&D right now? What if you save 10%? You have to start suggesting value. So you might consider that a brand new concept. You might consider it, a sidecar. I don't care. You have to start producing value if you want to create six-figure projects. So you have to monetize as much as possible, and you have to prompt value as much as possible. And that's the first step, the first critical element in six-figure projects. I'm going to turn here to the weather and look at the cold front coming in and see if I have questions. Hello from Portland. Good morning. Good morning. Hello from Atlanta. Yeah, it's going to be David Knorr from Atlanta. It's going to be 95 here today. Roberta Matchison. Hello from steamy Boston. Okay. I see no questions. So feel free to ask questions. Besides greeting me, I appreciate the affection, but questions would be very nice. Critical element number 2. Begin with a high fee as option 1. Don't start with a low fee to try to get in the door. Don't start with a low fee to try to set the stage. Here's the mentality you have to have if you want six-figure projects. If somebody consistently picks, if buyers consistently pick option 1, I will become wealthy. Don't look at option 1 as a giveaway. Don't look at option 1 as a way to get to the other options. If people consistently pick option 1, then I'll be wealthy. That has to be your mindset. Now, the way you do that is sit down and write your proposal and create options 1, 2, and 3. And then throw them out and create options 4, 5, and 6. That's what you have to do. When I was in Rutgers, I was a very popular professor, and he taught a freshman class. He was only about 25 years old. One of these guys who was just full of himself, super confident, thought he was an expert. I mean, who gets like that? And I had his freshman class, Dr. Nachman. And he taught a junior class. When I was a junior, he taught another class that you had to apply to get into on radical politics. He later became quite famous as a professor of radical politics over at NYU or someplace. But I had the honor of having him in Rutgers. He was a tough guy, but he had a great reputation. So freshman classes are huge. His junior class, it was supposed to be small, and about 30 people show up. And the first class, 45 minutes, whatever it was, he delivers a lecture on Neoplatonism. It was incomprehensible, indecipherable. We're scribbling notes, no computers, writing notes. And I went home and I said, my God, it's going to be the toughest course I've ever taken. I can't understand a word he said. So the next session was 2 days later, and only 17 of us showed up. And he said, all right, take out your notes from the first meeting. We took them out. He said, put them in the trash can. He walks around, put them in the trash can. He said, enough of that nonsense. I had to weed out the group. I learned a big lesson from Dr. Nachman. Now, what I'm telling you is options 1, 2, and 3, throw them out, weed out the group. Get rid of them. And then start with 4, 5, and 6. So if option 3, is $135,000, you start with option 4, which is $160,000. You have to get into that mental set and stop thinking of gradual escalation. Now, ethically, option 1 has to meet all the objectives. So option 1 has to be a substantial option, but then option 2 and option 3 offer additional value. Now, if you go back to my first critical element, introduce more value. It doesn't have to have come from the client. I've been thinking about this as I formulated the proposal, and I've added still more value that you can get here. You can say that in your cover letter, or you can make it self-evident. So ethically, option 1 covers everything. But the reason that maximizing objectives measure of value is important is it allows you to generate still more for options 2 and 3. So don't look for exposure, don't look for a pilot, don't look for some introduction, and understand that option 1 can make you wealthy. That's a mindset issue, and you have to adopt that. You cannot have this feeling that you have failed if they don't take option 3. I see a lot of debate, in Allen's forums. I sort of feel as average people take option 2 and that'll make me happy. I'm not selling option 3, what's wrong with it? If option 1 will make you wealthy, option 2 and option 3 are just gravy. Right? Good? I turn again here. Croatia, that's nice. If option 1, says David Noor from Steamy Atlanta, is high fee, what are options 2 and 3? Lower and less value from there. No, escalation, David, escalation. Option 1 is irresistible, it meets the objectives, it gets a 10 to 1 or better return, and it suits the kind of formula I have back here for the client, large ROI. And then option 2 and option 3 get still better. I hate to use an auto reference, you know me, but when you walk into an auto dealer, the auto dealer says, what are your objectives? What are you looking for? Do you have a family? Do you want an SUV or are you looking for a sports car? What are you looking for? And directs you to the right kind of vehicle and throws you the keys and says, sit in, start her up, want to take it for a test drive. You come back from the test drive and he says, it's a great car, how much? And the dealer says, the salesperson says, well, before we get to that, there's another one just around the corner here. You look great in this car. You'd look even better in that car. So, well, it can't hurt to sit in it. And by the time you go out of there, you have the high-end sports car, or you got an SUV that's loaded and dripping with stuff. That's not a bad tactic because why? It's emotional. Logic makes people think, emotion makes them act. And when you sit in one of these cars, when we got one of our very first exotic cars, a Mercedes 450 SLC, rare car. It was the SL, but a hardtop. We got it in California. And on Van Ness Street in California, at the time, there were 45 dealerships. You could see anything from a Ferrari to a Morgan Stanley to an Aston Martin, didn't matter. And we went up and down, walked up and down Van Ness, and Maria sat in an SL. And she sat in that car for 10 seconds and says, this is the car. It was a sensory experience, that Mercedes. We had it for 11 years. It's a great car. And so you want to create the sensory experience as people escalate. So by all means, option 1 is 6 figures, option 2 is higher, option 3 is higher. And by the way, we have to get used to saying the fee is $125,000 without laughing. It's my cigar story. I won't bore you with it here. But I have some more examples of that in a minute. David, I hope that helped. Mark Netterman from Germany. In writing options 4, 5, 6 about adding more value to the proposal, or it's about increasing one's fees, it's about both. So in options 4, 5, and 6, you're increasing value and increasing fees. Fees and value are in a direct proportion, with one exception, which I'll tell you about in a few seconds. So, Mark, you want to increase the value I'm getting. A nicer car, more status, more prestige, I feel good, emotional experience, and commensurately increase your fees. Now, here's the exception. Another piece of heresy. People believe they get what they pay for. People believe they get what they pay for. And so, it's not just a question of utility, it's a question of usage. 6-figure projects are not about utility, we're going to cut attrition, it's about usage. We're going to look great. The media will treat us fabulously. Our investors will think well of us because these lines cross. Fee follows value, right? The more value, the more fee, except they cross here. And value follows fee. I kid you not. And this point, that point is about brand power. It's about people who want to deal with you. It's about intellectual property. It's about books being written. It's about thought leadership. It's about being an icon. And when you get there, people don't care about the price. They assume that they will get what they pay for. And that is a marketing advantage that no one can deny. So keep in mind, you're improving value so you improve fees, but you can get to a point in life where value will follow the fee. And if you don't believe that, just look at Bentley or Bulgari or Brioni. All right, I move. Where am I? Number 3. Critical element number 3. Frame it right. These projects generally begin at $120,000. I said I'd be talking about some language to use. You have to reframe. You can't be tentative about it. You have to brace the buyer for this. And so the buyer will say to you, what's the fee for something like this? Now, traditionally, what have we said? We've said, let me have a day to think about it. I don't want to do you an injustice. And I'll create a proposal, and you can have it tomorrow, and you'll see your investment in return. That's the traditional language, and it's been quite good. It's been quite effective. People call me all the time. See, the phone rings. But what you have to do is go above and beyond that. What you have to do is you have to say, I'll have a proposal to you tomorrow, but just as a frame of reference, not to warn you, not don't run away, but just as a frame of reference, these projects typically begin at $125,000. These projects average $145,000. And let people know that. On a corporate basis, they're spending that much money to plow the driveway of snow, to mist the plants, to take care of spilled coffee. In a small business, you might think that's more expensive, but not when you think of what they're spending on inventory or variable expenses or wasting because the family has provided some bad information to the people running the business. So it doesn't seem like that much. So frame it correctly from the outset if you want six-figure projects. Now, here's some more language. My best clients have generally invested $140,000 in these projects on average, and their return has been 16 to 1. I can give you references when we're ready to discuss that. It's always okay to negotiate terms, by the way, as long as you're not negotiating fee. And so if a buyer says 140 is more than I intended, and you say, well, look, it's $70,000 to begin and another $70,000 in 45 days. This is why you start with the maximally acceptable terms to you. But we can adjust that. We can make it $55,000 now and so much in 30 days and so much in 60 days. Negotiating fees has a wonderful palliative effect. Negotiating terms, scratch that. Negotiating terms has a wonderful palliative effect, but your fees remain high. Vet the company and the buyer carefully. And when I say vet them carefully, who are you dealing with? In Merck, my favorite example, the guy who spent $250,000 a year with me had a title of Director of International Development. And he was about 9 levels down from the CEO, but he had budget in a company that large. You walk into a bank, everyone's a vice president, and very few of them can make any kind of decision. I'm trying to buy a second house. Last year we refinanced this house because the rates were so good. You're dealing with 150 people, none of whom can make a decision. All they do is collect information. It's a tedious process. You know, the person who opens a door for you in a bank is the vice president of entry. So vet the company and vet the person. A lot of your buyers, folks, if you want to move to six-figure projects, 6 to 7, or just move to consistently six-figure projects, if you want to do that, you have to understand that some of your buyers are no longer buyers. You have to move to their boss or to another venue, to another person. And so don't assume your current buyer is still the same buyer. And that means you have to educate the new buyer all over again. Next, be willing to walk away. Critical element number 3, don't chase money. You want six-figure projects? Don't chase 5-figure projects or 4-figure projects. Don't take something because the money's on the table and you can do it and you have time. Don't say, well, they want to give me $15,000 to facilitate over a weekend. I have the time. I could use the $15,000. When you do these things, they undermine your attention, undermine your energy, undermine your focus, and they also put you at a certain price level. So it's anathema to chase money if you're trying to consistently get six-figure projects. I turn back here. I have a question. I don't have a question. But I'll tell you something I'm asked all the time, and that's this. How long does it take to make the transition? It doesn't take any time to make the transition. It depends what you're offering. If you offer something, people will take it. If you want to get out of the coaching business, for example, don't offer coaching services. If you want to get out of the project business and into the advisory business, and I'll talk about that in a little while, don't offer project business. So if you want to get into the six-figure business, only offer six-figure projects. Does that take some nerve? Yeah. Is it worth it? Sure. So don't forget, $10,000, $70,000 projects are fine. But if you really want to go to six-figure projects, this is the mentality you have to have. Critical element. I don't use technology because I can't even use a flip chart. This is critical factor number 4. Not critical, but critical factor number 4. Become totally comfortable with advisory work. I told you I'd come back to this. So the big money, and six figures in particular, is in advisory work. $10,000 a month as an advisor. Now let's say that's just 6 months. That's $60,000. But if you get somebody else for the next 6 months, it's $120,000. And if you get 10 kinds of dynamics like that, you're talking a really healthy year. But what you have to do is to become accustomed to the fact, to believe in the fact, to accept the fact that your advice is valuable. And too many of you don't accept that. You think you have to be delivering. You default to the classroom. You want to present. Now, I have nothing wrong with presenting. I have nothing wrong with classroom or coaching or anything you want to do. I am not being pejorative about it, but I'm telling you, if you really want to do advisory work, you have to understand the value of what's between your ears. Because the reason you can deliver, the reason you can do classroom work or coaching work or facilitation work or anything else is that you're smart, is that you're an expert. Those are simply delivery vehicles. And so my question to you is, are you comfortable with being an expert giving advice? Now, $10,000 a month on average becomes a six-figure project for the year. So you have to consider some high-value features of advisory work. Not all advisory work is the same. Now, you could be an advisor for $5,000 a month. Somebody asks you a couple of questions, they're happy, you're happy. However, if you want to increase the value, number one, tell your client you're available on weekends. I guarantee that will seldom be used or let alone abused. When I began my consulting work, the big thing was an open door policy. My door is always open. Anybody can walk in. I never heard one executive complain that his or her day was any way degraded by so many people walking into the office. People did not take advantage of it, let alone abuse it. When I began my mentor program, and this is still the case with my coaching program, I offered unlimited access. $3,500 unlimited access for 6 months. No one ever abused it. People apologized. People would say, I'm sorry to bother you. And so when you offer something on weekends, your executive clients will not abuse that. They might call you in an emergency. They might call you because they have a quandary, but how much is that worth? So it's one easy thing to offer, and it's also one thing that's probably not going to be used frequently at all. Number two, have scheduled meetings. Just because you're an advisor doesn't mean you can't have meetings. And so you might have Zoom meetings. I happen to like the Zoom technology. Some of my growth cycle groups use it. I find it better than Skype. You might use Skype technology. You might use a phone call. You might appear in person. You might have a quarterly meeting at the client's site or invite the client to your place. Incidentally, we're in my retreat center right now. It used to be the indoor pool, and I had this built, and we can have 12 or 13 people around a table, or back here, I can meet with people for immersion sessions one-on-one. But before this was built, and it was the indoor pool, we used to meet here in my living room or my dining room. And clients loved to come here. Corporate people, I'm not talking about my mentorees, corporate people used to come here. They felt it was comfortable, they felt it was personal, and at one point we fired the executive director of one of the largest professional associations in the country in the room right over there with the chairman of the board and the human resources vice president because he wasn't doing the job. We had to ambush him here. But I tell you this because you can have people come to you. It's a personal experience, and it fits in with advisory work. That's not implementation. It's not project work. Next, Be available during the client's business hours, not just yours. And so you have a client on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast, be available for another 3 hours. How do you do that? By cell phone. You don't sit in your office by the phone. And let me make a clear understanding here. Advisory work is for you being responsive, not being available. There's a big difference. And so if you want to move to six-figure projects based on advisory work, you make yourself available, but not instantly. You are responsive. And so you get back to people promptly. So you keep your cell phone with you. You give your cell phone to these people who sign up for this kind of money. But it's the client's business hours. What if the client's in Asia or Europe? Work it out. I am on calls all the time. Skype, Zoom, phone, doesn't matter. With people in Australia and Japan and New Zealand and the Middle East. You adjust for the time differences. That's okay. It's all right to make a call at 5 in the morning or 10 at night or whatever it happens to be, because it works for your client who's paying you a lot of money. Next, embrace multiple leaders. Your advisory work doesn't have to be with simply one person. It can be with several people in the same company, as long as they all understand that, and that makes it all the more valuable. So, 6 figures for advising is very cheap on a $10 million project. And your clients are dealing with $10 million projects and much more. Your clients are entering new markets, they're building new facilities, they're changing compensation systems, they're changing advertising. Your clients are doing major things. And a $10,000 a month retainer to help with millions of dollars of investment and return is not much at all. And so that's my 4th factor. Become totally comfortable with that kind of work. I go back here. Jeff Skipper, can you comment a bit on the value of speed in terms of money? Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things you can promise in advisory work is to be responsive to the point where you get back within a certain amount of time. My original mentor program was 90 minutes. And I realized that if you start at 9 in the morning, I could call it 10:30, which is 90 minutes past most companies' start time, and immediately return calls. That would take care of my 90 minutes. But of course, if somebody called in at 10 o'clock, 10:30 wasn't all that important. I had more time. Then I would call in at noon. Then I would call in at 2:30 and then at 4. And that covered the waterfront. Now, that was if I was busy all day. I was with a client on an engagement or I was delivering a program or something else. But if you're not busy all day, it's easy to call in much more frequently than that. And returning these calls rapidly is highly valuable. Highly valuable. And I'll say something else in terms of Jeff's question. I would say at least half the clients who spoke to me simply wanted me to listen. They wanted me to validate what they had in mind. They didn't want new ideas or innovation. They wanted me to validate. In fact, 90%, you're hearing that right, 90% of my project work with clients was validation. They wanted an outside, objective person who's smart and doesn't have a vested interest one way or the other to tell them what they're doing is right, or if it's not, why it's not right. Only 10% of my work was vastly innovative and different. Now, I say that proudly. It was a big role, an important role, a valuable role. So the same thing with your clients. Fast response is important. Speed is important, and not just in your response time, but in what you tell them to do. Try to give clients advice in an advisory capacity where they can act fast. Pragmatic advice they can do now. Tell them to do it tomorrow. And that is the kind of advice they pay a lot of money for, because speed is of the essence in the market today, much more so than ever. Jeff, I hope I answered your question. And feel free to hit chat and ask me more, but otherwise I move on. Critical element number 5 is to think cumulatively. And cumulatively, besides being hard to say, cumulatively means this particular subscription service you're on is $400 for my 6 programs. Some of you pay $75, picking which ones you want to listen to. But this is our experiment for this year, and I decided $400 was a very reasonable amount so that you could partake of this and I could see how it went and so forth. Now, you multiply that times 400 subscribers and you get an interesting figure. Next year, what I want is 2,000 subscribers. That's thinking cumulatively. Those of you familiar with my accelerant curve might think that the right side of the curve has only very high-end project kind of work. It doesn't. It has an approach to the market that's worth a lot of money, and in the vault especially is unique to you. And so, for example, what I'm doing in Boston in April is my 4th annual consulting convention. Costs $1,000 on average to go. It depends when you enroll. But if you get 150, 250, 300 people ultimately going to these things, it gets very interesting. And the fact is, there's nowhere else on earth as a consultant or coach that you can experience what's in my consulting convention. No place. Solamente, only there. And similar to this, no one else is doing live stream right now on the kind of topics important for growth of independent consultants. The Institute of Management Consultants isn't doing it, no other consultant's doing it, except the get-rich guys who are teaching you pyramid stuff, right? So that's why this is valuable, but you have to think cumulatively. Got it. Second, think of interlocking projects. So when you think of a project that makes sense for sales, ask yourself, why can't it make sense for R&D? Why can't it make sense for marketing? If it's working in North America, why can't it make sense in Europe? I was in State Street Bank, another one of my very large clients for a few years, and I was presenting to the senior management team, and there's a stranger in the room. I thought I knew everybody. So as the session ended, I said to one of my colleagues, "Who's that?" He said, "Oh, he's visiting. He's in charge of European operations." I said, "Introduce me." I did. He did. And the guy said, "I enjoyed your presentation." I said, "Well, listen, is there anything you heard today that doesn't apply to you?" And that's how I got the business in Europe. I wound up working all around the world for State Street Bank. So interlock. Think of other places this can go. If you're working on a recruitment project for a client, doesn't it make sense that perhaps you should also suggest a development project for people's talents or a development bank for people's talents? I mean, really? If you're working on a sales project for a client, why wouldn't you think about a marketing project for that client? Or sales advisory work, why not marketing advisory work? You see where I'm going? I call it interlocking projects. The trust is already there. Next, look for guaranteed phases. So phase 1 has these kinds of metrics, and if we reach those metrics, we automatically kick into phase 2 and its payments and phase 3 and its payments. Another way to think cumulatively. In other words, phase 1 might be to roll this out across the United States. Phase 2 would include all of North America. Phase 3 would include Latin America, and so forth. No reason not to suggest that. Next, exploit previously successful smaller projects. And so you've got an accumulation of things that have gone on before, which you can probably combine and say, look, we've taken sort of a haphazard approach to these things. We've looked at them in microcosm. Doesn't it make sense to look at them in totality now? Take a holistic view. It's another way to think cumulatively. And then finally, you're an expert, and you convey your expertise in a variety of ways. Consulting and speaking and coaching and facilitation and writing and so forth. So you can license IP, you can become a spokesperson for the company. There's all kinds of things you can do, but this is what I mean by cumulative. So apart from advisory work, if you want to get involved with delivery and project work, there's a lot of different things you can do, often with low labor because of technology. So why not expose the client to the panoply of what you're capable of so that you can address these things? It's as simple as that. So we've talked thus far about these 5 elements. We've talked about, easier this way, we've talked about becoming adept at developing value and suggesting value, not relying on the client. Number 2, beginning with a high fee for option 1 and building from there. Number 3, creating the correct frame from the outset with your language. This is costing a basis of. Number 4, becoming comfortable with advisory work, which become very high fee and very profitable. And number 5, thinking cumulatively. If you do these 5 things, your chances of landing 6-figure projects are much higher. It's as simple as that. Now, let me see what we got here. Okay, we have a docile group. I don't see any new questions. So I'm going to do a couple of things. Think of this as art. You know, what we do is art and science. Think of this as the art portion. And the art is adopt the mindset that you need to do this. Reframe the conversation and trigger a value eruption. Art. And if you're thinking that way, then that's what you'll be talking to your prospects about and talking to your clients about. But this is the precursor for that. This is what you have to do. Now, in order to do this, you have to shake off where you are. And so the final thing I'm going to do for you today is to show you how to shake things off. I call this the nesting syndrome. And I've discovered that these elements cause us not to make the changes we need to move to six-figure projects, to move to a lower labor intensity frame of mind and working, to shake ourselves up so that we can lead a fuller life. And my nesting syndrome, which is going to be in my new book, 3Score and More, I presented to a small group the other day, and they thought it was worthy of a book in itself. That I don't know, but let me explain to you what this is like so you can think about it. Number one, unconscious competency, which we tend to think is the highest form of thinking. You know, you want to go from unconscious incompetency to conscious incompetency to conscious competency. But the problem is, when we're unconsciously competent, we're insufficiently self-aware. And when we're insufficiently self-aware, we don't change. And we become oblivious. We live in our nest. We don't realize what's going on or that we need changes. Number two, we don't shake up things enough. You know, the old thing is, if you go to an old plant, to an old line business, they'll say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. When I introduced innovation in my books, what I talked about was, if it ain't broke, fix it anyway. We don't shake things up enough. We get complacent. You have to look at your business, not just what you think isn't working well, but what is working well, and shake it up. Schrumpter called innovation creative destruction. Number three, we don't offer enough new value to existing clients. We look for referrals, and we hope for repeat business by expansion in the client, but we don't offer new value in the existing client. Why aren't we doing that? The value we're offering is well received, we're trusted. Why don't we produce new value for that client? That's why I'm telling you all the time, you have to produce new IP on a weekly basis. Number four, we're not soliciting enough referrals. We're not allowing for sufficient evangelism. And so we say, yeah, I should ask for more referrals. Yes, I could probably get more referrals, but we don't ask for them enough. Next, we have king of the hill problem. We don't get challenged. A lot of you are sitting pretty, and people are afraid to challenge you. Or people look to you, they look up to you. And we're not challenged often enough. One of the things I say about thought leaders is you can tell that they're a thought leader when people take shots at them. And when people take shots at you, you challenge. You dismiss the idiots and the trolls, but you listen to others and say, should I be changing my tune? Should I be changing my mind? Should I be improving on what I have? I do that all the time. I just gave you an example today about providing value instead of eliciting value. We're great at problem solving, but we don't innovate. We see something wrong and we fix it because we know it used to work, but we don't raise the bar. Marshall Goldsmith and I wrote in Life Storming, we have to raise the bar as we go through our journey of life and then adjust to those new heights and create new metrics for ourselves. We don't take the sharp right turn I talk about in strategy sufficiently. We stay the course. So conformist innovation is staying the course and doing better and better, we hope. But nonconformist innovation is taking a sharp right and saying, I'm now number one in this market. I am now on advisory services only. I now will do no more projects singly or cumulatively for less than 6 figures. We're not firing clients. We're not dropping the 15% of the bottom of our least profitable, least interesting, most troublesome clients. We're not dropping them frequently enough. Why? Because we're chasing money. Why? Because we treat them like pet rocks. They've been around forever. Let's keep them. Let's pet them a little bit. Like a pet rock, though, they don't respond. We're chasing money. I talked about that earlier. We're spending time over here grabbing a little bit of money instead of spending time here thinking about how to get a lot more money. We have low IP generation. If you want to add value and sell more value to existing clients, you have to generate IP on a continual basis. That's what I'm doing here. We're sharing the nest with the wrong species. We need we need diversity in our nests. We need different kinds of critters in our nests. We need people who will challenge us, throw us out of the nest. Not just people who look like us, not just people who think like us. We're hanging around with people who commiserate with us. No good. We're not failing enough. If you're not failing enough, you're not trying enough. Failure comes with the turf. $1 Million Consulting, a franchise of fabulous worth. The book had 15 rejections. We're just not trying hard enough because we're not failing often enough because we seek perfection and we're afraid of failure. And finally, that gets us to a fear of flying altogether. We built the nest by flying up there. And we built the nest because we're flying creatures, but now we're afraid of flying altogether. And that's just a shame because we feathered the nest and we're fat and happy, and that's not the way that you earn a good living and have a lot of discretionary time. I have a question from Bill Sanders. What size company should we be ideally targeting for six-figure projects? Good question. I would say any company over $500 million easily. And so the Fortune 1000, closely held businesses that are at that point and above, and situationally lower revenue companies that are used to making those kinds of expenditures. But basically, if I had to pick my ideal client, it's a line executive with P&L responsibility in a Fortune 1000, or the owner of a closely held business at $500 million and more. Situationally, I might take in others as they approach me, but I wouldn't target them. And that's the key here, the ideal client. Helen Turnbull loves nesting syndrome. Thank you, Helen. She was here the other day looking at it. One of the people who told me they really loved it. So, Bill, I hope I answered your question. And so what I want you to get out of today is the following. A six-figure project is not a be-all and end-all, but a lot of people are doing them. And there's no reason you shouldn't. They don't have to be exclusively what you do, but obviously if they're more of what you do, then you're going to do better and better. I have time here. Mark, Rick Pace said the video timed out, is that right? Are we still on? Okay. Mark Niederman says, how do you increase self-awareness in regard to your competency and expertise? Oh, look at that.
Yeah, we're on.
We're on? Okay.
It's your network.
Okay, my network. Mark, how do you increase self-awareness in regard to your competency and expertise? You've got to talk to people and travel and learn. There's no way you understand the Great Wall of China by reading about it or watching pictures. There's no way you can appreciate a football touchdown pass without being there in person. TV distorts it. We all right, Gary?
Yeah, I'm broadcasting.
Okay, well, we think we're broadcasting. I'm going to continue.
Yep.
And, Sheila now says, getting message video cannot load or times out.
But it's going to
Okay.
stream.
All right, I continue. Mark, and so what you have to do, Mark, is you have to expose yourself to new people. You have to continually meet new people and see new people and deal with new people. And that way, your self-awareness will increase because you're hearing things that are not necessarily in step with what you believe in. So have your beliefs challenged. What do you think, Gary? Are we good or no?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
They can watch it anyways.
All right. So I'm told even if some of this video timed out for some reason, you can still watch it. So I just want to remind you of this. The next live stream is September 19th, 11 Eastern. It's about abundance thinking. That's going to be a good one of my favorite topics. 2, I mentioned Growth Access. It's $2,500 for life, your life, not mine, on my site. Number 3, I have a life storming teleconference July 6th, an hour teleconference on the subject of life storming. You can sign up on my site. I'm in Boston for Maverick Day, September 8th. You're welcome to come. Some people have already qualified for it because they joined the Maverick Mob, but if you haven't, you can write to me and I can admit you for a small fee. I think it's $750 for a day with me. That's nothing. I'm in New York, October 19th and 20th. It's 2 days. It's $1,400. We already have a boatload of people, and I'm going to be talking about everything in terms of marketing, fees and approaching the market and changing how you're seen and branding and messaging and so on. And then Thought Leadership, of course, October 4 to 6 in Palm Beach. This is Dan Gilbert, the guru of happiness from Harvard. And you're never going to be, you will never have an opportunity to sit in a small group of 30 people and also have dinner with this guy and deal with him on an intimate basis. That opportunity exists nowhere else. So I hope you'll consider joining us for that. I have 1 or 2 seats left. All right? I'm happy to be with you. Thanks for joining us. I hope the technical problems really didn't occur, but you'll be able to watch this anyhow. Signing off. See you next time.